when you're a beginner in quilting, you are going to have some questions and you need somebody to answer them for you. So, ta-da, here I am. Now, Rose popped a comment under one of my videos and she had such a great question. I thought I would answer them live on here. It's not quite live. You know what I mean, just bear with me. So let's answer Rose's question, which is about what piecing is and whether we need cotton or polyester thread for quilting. So who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You are very, very welcome. Stick around to the end as well, because I've got an idea and you can let me know whether it's a good idea or not. But let's answer Rose's question first. So Rose has asked, I'll just pop her comment back up on the screen again. Rose has asked, what does it mean for piecing? So I had to read off my bit of paper there. It's also very small because I haven't got my glasses on. So what does it mean for piecing? Does that refer to sewing pieces of the cotton quilt to each other versus sewing through the 3 layers of the fabric? Also, should we use cotton or polyester for the quilting? And they were all great questions. So let's take one at a time. So Rose is absolutely correct. The piecing, when it says for piecing or piecing, that means that you have cut up your fabric into little bits and you sew them back together again. My husband can never quite understand that principle, but we understand it, don't we? So we've cut our fabric up into pieces. We are sewing those together, and the act of sewing those back together again to make our pretty patterns, that is called piecing. Okay, when we join those patterns together, we form blocks. Don't get overly confused, just go with me on this. We form the blocks and those turn into the pattern on our quilt. So sometimes we can be doing piecing on very small bits and they don't look very much on their own, but when they're joined together with lots of other little mini blocks, then they turn into your quilt or whatever it is that you're making. So this cushion behind me, this 9-patch cushion, that's what I teach all my beginners. I start all my beginners on a very small project because it gets you used to those basic skills. But you can see here that we've cut fabric up into small pieces and we've sewn them to make the 4 corners, which are like a little checkerboard effect in the corners. And that's how we've joined them together to make a pattern. So that's all piecing is cutting up your fabric to join them back together again to make your patterns, and it's those that turn into your blocks that ultimately turns into your quilt or table runner or whatever it is you're making. So that's question 1, which is piecing. So Rose also asks, we've answered that question, sewing through what's the sewing through the 3 layers of fabric? Now that is the quilting. Okay, now it is confusing because when we start out, everything's called quilting. The whole industry is called quilting. The whole hobby is called quilting. And you might think, well, I've only just started. So, can I call myself a quilter yet or whatever? And yes, you can. The whole industry is called quilting. It's like the big sister to patchwork. Patchwork came along a little bit later. I'm not going into the history now, but just know that the whole hobby, the whole industry is called quilting, whether you are doing patchwork or the actual quilting itself. Now, if we've spoken about the patchwork, so that's where we cut our pieces of fabric up into pieces and we sew them together to make our patterns, to make our whatever it is we're making. The quilting is when we take that patterned top, whether it's on a cushion or a bigger quilt like the big one behind me, and we join that together with our wadding or batting and our backing. And when we join those 3 layers together, we have to sew them together. And we sew them together through a technique called quilting. Now that quilting can be really simple and it could be hand or machine, still really simple. So to sew those together, you might just want to do a big hand running stitch and that'll sort it out. Or you could go very fancy and do free motion quilting. Don't do that as a beginner, please. That's far too advanced. But this, the big quilt behind me, this sunshine quilt, actually based on cockerel feathers, don't you know? That is free motion quilted. So that's where we draw with a machine. Don't worry about that. But the act of sewing those 3 layers together, however we've got there, is your quilting part. And that quilting does a little job. It holds those 3 layers together. So we've got the 3 layers of our quilt. The top on its own, that the piecing, the patchwork bit, isn't quite strong enough to handle the rigours of everyday life on its own, because we've only got those 1/4 inch seams and there's lots of little pieces. So if you introduce that into the rigours of everyday life, it would ultimately fall apart. So we need to put it together with our wadding or batting and our backing, and we have to then sew those 3 layers together. Okay, so that's the quilting part. Now that quilting has a couple of other jobs. So it is to sew those 3 things together. It also becomes decorative, so you can create all sorts of decorations and patterns and movements and anything else you want with the quilting. When you're a beginner starting out, that can be really overwhelming, so don't worry, just keep it really simple. Straight lines will do when you get started. So we can be decorative, and straight lines can be decorative, but we also form little pockets of air when we do our quilting. Now, if you quilt in a kind of normal way with little areas in between your quilting lines, they will form little pockets of air, and those little pockets of air make our quilts, if we're making quilts, all kind of snuggly buggly. As my mum used to say, snuggly buggly. It's a good word, isn't it? Let's keep it on this channel, snuggly buggly. That's our new word. So it keeps our quilts all snuggly and warm and cozy, which is what we want from a bed quilt or a lap quilt. If you're doing something else, you might want a different style of quilting, but I'm not going to worry about that in this video. Now, the second part of Rose's question is really interesting, and I did want to cover this because she said, should we use cotton or polyester for the quilting? And that is an excellent question, Rose. Now, let me explain the differences between them, because when we are piecing, and just bear with me because it's important to understand this, when we are piecing, we use a cotton thread. Now, why we use that is because we're using a cotton fabric to do our patchwork with, particularly when we're starting out. And pretty much most of the time, I've been quilting a very long time and I still use 100% cotton fabric for my patchwork. When we are piecing, we're cutting up our small pieces, as we've established, and we're sewing with a 1/4 inch seam. So we've got a small seam allowance on small pieces. If we sew those together with a polyester thread, that polyester thread is stronger than the cotton. So what is likely to happen is that it pulls against that the cotton fibres of the fabric, and it pulls into that seam allowance. And you haven't got much seam allowance to play with, really. So when you start doing that kind of rough and tumble that stuff has in everyday use, that polyester can pull against the cotton. And you can often find this when you see pictures in forums of people going, oh my God, what's happened? My seam's ripped apart. And that's what that's what happens when we're got a small seam allowance and we're pulling against a polyester thread, because that's stronger than the cotton. If we use a cotton thread, that can sit nicely within the cotton fibre of our fabric, and all is well and good in our world, but we still need our 1/4 inch seam allowance. The other reason for using cotton thread is because all fabrics have a natural shrinkage rate. Now, don't panic about this, because nothing is going to shrink wildly before your very eyes, but a natural fibre like cotton has its own shrinkage rate. Cotton is about 5%. Now, if you've got a poor quality cotton, so you've picked up some cheap fabric from somewhere to practice on, you may find that shrinks far more than a good quality cotton that you'll get from one of the big brand names who serve the quilting industry. And you'll only really see that when it goes through the wash. And sometimes, actually, I've seen a really cheap cotton that I bought myself, and I held the iron over it, and the steam of the iron sort of shushed onto the fabric, and it went and it's just like that as well. It went with sound effects, and it shrank, and it was quite dramatic to see. So yeah, probably there is some fabric that shrinks wildly before your eyes, but a good quality cotton fabric shouldn't shrink to that amount, but it does have a natural shrinkage rate. So when you've finished your quilt and when we put that through the wash, that's where we'll see that natural shrinkage rate. So if you are using a cotton thread and a cotton fabric, using those two together to do your piecing, the sewing, the patchwork together, those two will shrink at the same rate and you won't notice anything. But if you use a polyester, you're likely to get the fabric shrinking more than the polyester thread. Polyester does have a slight shrinkage rate, but it is a lot less than your cotton fabric, or a lot less than cotton. So your cotton fabric will shrink and it will pull against that polyester thread, and that's where we can start getting breaking seams. Do you see why that's important for your cotton thread, or using your cotton thread for piecing? However, when we get onto the quilting, we've got a different role here. So do you remember, our quilting is to sew those 3 layers together. We're being decorative and we're creating those little pockets of air. Now, the quilting, because it's doing a different job, we can actually go wild. Now, as a beginner, we are very likely to get started with a nice cotton quilting thread. This is a 30 weight thread from Gutermann, but all the thread manufacturers will produce a cotton quilting thread, and that is very easy to quilt with. It's very nice to quilt with, and it shows up very nicely on the surface of your quilt. However, what you may have noticed in the shops is that you get gorgeous threads like these ones, which are all shiny and blingy, and these are all of they're not quite polyester, but they come from the same source. Now, these are rayon and polyamide, which is evidently not the same as polyester. Now, just bear with me. I'm not giving you a science lesson because I'm so not qualified to do that. However, I am married to somebody who was a scientist and is a plastics expert. Who knew? I'll let you into a secret. We used to have a magazine delivered here called Plastics and Rubber Weekly. I am kidding you, absolutely not. I never read it. God knows what was inside. Anyway, these all have different molecular structures. If you want to know a little bit of science, I am stopping at the science there. But these are all that kind of polyestery threads, what we might think of polyester threads. They're not cotton. These are man-made fibres. They come out of the oil industry and they turn into, ultimately, these beautiful glitzy threads. And yes, you can absolutely use these for quilting because that quilting is doing a different job. We got there. We got through the science. Phew! So, in answer to the question, for your piecing, just to recap, so doing the patchwork, use the cotton. I've talked about why that's important. For the quilting, the decorative part on the top, you can use either cotton or you can use a polyester thread to add your glitz and glamour to it. So go for it, whichever one that you want to do on your quilt. So Rose, if you're watching, I hope that has helped. Now, my idea, I've been inspired by Rose. That was such a good question. If you are a beginner and you've got some little questions like that you're not quite finding the answer for, you just need a bit of clarification, why don't we do an occasional Quilt with Kim community question time? There's a lot of cues there, isn't it? Would you like your question answered on a video? And if nobody's answered out there, or it's a bit difficult, or you're not quite sure what the answer is, if you have got a picture that you need sorting out, I can deal with pictures as well, but you do need to send them to me. I'm not going to give my email out live on a video, but if you look down in the description below, you'll find my website. You'll find out how to contact me on there. Do you think that's a good idea? Would you like your questions answered on this channel? If so, let me know in the comments below. You can pop a comment under any of my videos. I do see them all. I do answer them all, as you probably know if you've been following me for a while. Anyway, I hope that has helped in answering Rose's question. If it has, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I will love you and leave you for now, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. Hello, sorry, just interrupting. Before you watch another YouTube quilting tutorial, and if you're a complete beginner, click pause right now and grab my free Quilters Quick Start Toolkit. In it, I've shown you exactly what you need to buy and what you don't. I've given an explanation of all that very weird quilting jargon. I've told you what projects are completely beginner friendly and which ones to avoid. And I've given you a fun step-by-step beginner 5-day email challenge. The link's just in the description below. You can download yours right now. Let's get you started with your quilting today with zero overwhelm and zero confusion. Back to your video binge then.